This rectangular silver platter, embossed with figures of Minerva and mythological animals, represents an appetite so vast it required an empire's logistics to satisfy. According to ancient sources, the recipe for the dish called for pike livers, pheasant brains, flamingo tongues, and lamprey milt, ingredients harvested and shipped in by naval fleets from the very edges of the Roman world. The man consuming this wealth was Aulus Vitellius. Looking at his marble portrait here, the broad face and heavy chins hint at his historical reputation. He was a Roman aristocrat famous for a physical appetite that bordered on the bottomless. Yet Vitellius hadn't eaten his way to the top through political brilliance or military command. He survived the paranoid reigns of Caligula, Claudius, and Nero by enthusiastically validating their personal obsessions. When Caligula wanted to race chariots, Vitellius cheered him on. He gambled endlessly with Claudius and coaxed Nero back onto the stage to play the lute. Decades of flattering murderous rulers shaped Vitellius into the ultimate opportunist. He learned that the safest way to navigate Roman politics was to offer zero resistance, abandon any sense of personal duty, and simply feed whatever vice the current tyrant preferred. By 68 AD, Nero was dead, and a new emperor named Galba faced a massive crisis. The legions on the Rhine frontier were volatile and on the brink of rebellion. Galba desperately needed to install a governor in the region who was entirely non-threatening, someone with absolutely no ambition to launch a military coup. Aulus Vitellius seemed like the perfect fit. He was so heavily in debt to moneylenders that to afford the travel expenses to his new post in Germany, he had to rent out his house and pawn a pearl torn from his mother's ear. But the legions on the Rhine didn't care about his bank account. They wanted a figurehead. One night, a mob of heavily armored soldiers broke into Vitellius's quarters, dragged the disheveled courtier directly from his bed, and spontaneously declared him Emperor of Rome. Shortly after this sudden promotion, a stove set fire to his headquarters dining room. While his staff panicked at the obvious bad omen, the newly minted emperor lazily dismissed the flames, declaring, "Courage, my men. Light is given us." Galba assumed a lazy glutton would be harmless. Instead, that extreme apathy made Vitellius the perfect, malleable puppet for ambitious generals looking to tear the empire apart for their own gain. Those ambitious generals, Caecina and Valens, immediately marched their forces south, colliding with and defeating a rival emperor named Otho at the First Battle of Bedriacum. Through all the fighting, Vitellius contributed absolutely nothing to the military victory. Vitellius's subsequent march toward the capital became a slow, rolling, drunken feast. This ancient Roman fresco of a banquet captured the atmosphere he brought with him as he descended into Italy. His vast entourage of attendants, actors, and cooks devoured everything in their path. Emboldened by their leader's lack of restraint, the soldiers looted farms, emptied granaries, and stripped the Italian countryside bare. The comedy of his gluttony vanished when his bloated caravan finally reached the rotting battlefield of Bedriacum. Staring out over a landscape strewn with the unburied corpses of his defeated countrymen, Vitellius remained completely impassive. He reportedly turned to his staff and remarked that the smell of a dead fellow citizen was sweet. His total lack of discipline had mutated. What started as a personal habit of eating lavish meals daily scaled into a state-sponsored appetite for devastation and blood. The rest of the empire refused to accept this. In the east, the battle-hardened legions of Judea and Syria declared their own commander, Vespasian, as the true emperor. As we can see in this marble bust, Vespasian presented a sharp contrast, a disciplined, pragmatic military man whose forces immediately began marching on Rome. As Vespasian's advance guard breached the city limits, Rome descended into chaos. The capital itself became a brutal zone of urban warfare, with loyalist mobs and soldiers fighting block by block. The violence funneled toward the Capitoline Hill, where Vitellian loyalists managed to trap Vespasian's brother inside the ancient citadel. This turned the very center of Roman religion into an active siege zone. As the attackers showered the defenders with tiles and torches, the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus caught fire. Within hours, the most sacred, venerable structure in the Roman world, packed with centuries of tributes and history, burned entirely to the ground. While the apocalyptic destruction of Rome's ancient heart raged outside, Vitellius was nearby, dining in a mansion that once belonged to the Emperor Tiberius, casually watching the flames. Elevating a passive, apathetic figurehead did not prevent tyranny. Without any guardrails or leadership to maintain order, the empire's military factions were left free to literally cannibalize their own foundations. When Vespasian's troops finally breached the palace walls, the illusion of power vanished. The sycophants, the guards, and the courtiers who had feasted on Vitellius's dime immediately deserted him. Stripped of his entourage, the emperor strapped on a money belt stuffed with gold pieces and scurried into a miserable doorkeeper's lodge. He jammed a bed against the door and tethered a dog outside in a pathetic attempt to hide. The invading soldiers easily found him. They hauled him out, stripped him half naked, and tied his hands tightly behind his back. To ensure he couldn't hide his face from the furious, dung-throwing mob, they thrust a metal sword point directly under his chin, forcing his head upward as they dragged him through the streets. The mob hauled him toward the stairs of mourning, the traditional site for public executions, much like the wide stone staircase seen here. Right before they struck the final blow, Vitellius offered one surprisingly dignified sentence: "Yet I was once your emperor." The crowd showed no mercy. After torturing and executing him, they dragged his corpse by a meat hook and dumped it into the muddy waters of the Tiber River. The violent purge of the glutton emperor proved a harsh reality. A raw instinct for personal survival, completely devoid of duty, inevitably consumes both the ruler and the realm. With his body washing away in the Tiber, the disastrous year of the 4 emperors finally came to an end. The death of Vitellius violently purged the last remnants of Julio-Claudian decadence from the Roman government. Vespasian immediately assumed control, imposing rigid discipline to rebuild a state that had been physically burned and financially bankrupted by months of chaotic civil war. The brief, bloody reign of Aulus Vitellius leaves behind a stark historical warning. Profound political apathy and unrestrained personal indulgence are just as effective at destroying an empire as the most calculated, malicious tyranny.